The rain pounded against the tinted windows of the luxury resort lobby, drowning out the soft hum of conversation and the occasional clink of glasses. Lena crossed her arms, shifting her weight as she watched the storm rage outside. She should have been curled up in her suite, sipping overpriced wine, enjoying her solo vacation, not stuck here, waiting for an update on the weather. "Excuse me, miss," the receptionist called out, breaking her thoughts. Due to the storm, all outbound transportation has been canceled until further notice. Lena let out a breath.
Great.
At least she had a beautiful resort to wait it out. However, the receptionist hesitated. "There's been a complication with your room." Lena's brow furrowed. "What kind of complication?" "The system accidentally double-booked, and with the storm, we're at full capacity." "You're telling me I don't have a room?"
Lena deadpanned.
The receptionist winced. "Well, you do, but there's only one available suite left. And it's already occupied." Lena's patience thinned. "So, I'm sharing a room with a stranger?" A deep voice cut through the air, sending an unwelcome shiver down her spine. "Not a stranger." Lena froze. She knew that voice. Slowly she turned, and there he was. Adrian Carter, the man who had broken her heart. Her ex. Her very much not moved on from ex. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was charged, tense. Adrian looked the same. Too good. His sharp jawline, the hint of stubble, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the edges. All of it was unfairly familiar. But his eyes? They looked tired, haunted. She swallowed hard. "You've got to be kidding me." "I wish I was," Adrian murmured. The receptionist glanced between them. "I take it you two know each other?" Lena let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, we know each other." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. "Look, it's just for the night. I'll sleep on the couch." She should say no. Demand another option. But the truth was they were both stuck. And refusing to share a room wouldn't change that. With a tight smile, Lena turned back to the receptionist.
"Fine. Give me the key."
As she reached for it, Adrian did the same, and their fingers brushed.
A spark.
A memory. Lena pulled back, as if burned. This was going to be a long night. Lena stepped into the suite, dropping her bag by the door before crossing her arms. The room was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the stormy ocean, sleek marble floors, and a massive king-sized bed that took center stage. A single bed. Of course. Adrian shut the door behind him, tossing his duffel onto the couch. "I meant what I said. I'll sleep here." Lena didn't respond. Instead, she walked to the window, watching as lightning slashed across the sky, illuminating the angry waves below. The storm was relentless, much like the thoughts swirling in her mind. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," Adrian said quietly. She let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, well, life's full of surprises." Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken words. It had been nearly a year since their breakup, since Adrian had walked out without a real explanation, leaving behind nothing but a shattered heart and unanswered questions. Now, trapped together, those questions burned hotter than ever. Adrian exhaled, running a hand down his face. "Lena, don't." She cut him off, turning to face him. "You don't get to do this. You left, Adrian. You disappeared. No calls. No texts. Nothing. And now, what? You think being stuck in a room together gives you a free pass to talk." His jaw tensed. "I didn't want to leave you." Anger flared in her chest. "But you did. And I had to pick up the pieces." She had meant to let it slip, but it was the truth. It had taken months to move on, to force herself to stop checking her phone for a message that never came, to stop replaying every moment, wondering what went wrong. Adrian looked away, guilt flickering across his face. Lena sighed, pressing her fingers to her temples. "Look, let's just get through the night without killing each other, okay? We'll go back to pretending we don't exist in the morning." Adrian's lips pressed into a thin line, as if he wanted to argue. But he didn't. Instead, he nodded. "Fine." Lena grabbed the extra blanket from the closet, tossing it onto the couch. "You can have this." Then, without another word, she climbed into the bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. She willed herself to ignore the fact that Adrian was mere feet away. But as she lay there, staring at the ceiling, his voice cut through the dark. "You deserve to know the truth, Lena." Her breath caught. "I never stopped loving you." Her heart clenched, but she didn't respond. Because if she did, she wasn't sure she could keep herself from breaking all over again. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to ignore him. She had spent too long drowning in questions, letting his absence carve a hollow space inside her. Now he was here in the same room, and she refused to let herself fall into the same trap again. But his words echoed in the silence. "I never stopped loving you." Lena forced herself to exhale evenly. "Go to sleep, Adrian." A heavy pause. Then a sigh.
Yeah.
"Sure." She heard the rustle of blankets as he settled on the couch. The storm outside raged on, rain hammering against the windows, thunder growling in the distance. Yet inside the suite, the tension between them was louder than the storm itself. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Sleep didn't come easily. Eventually, Lena turned onto her side, watching the shadows stretch across the ceiling. The couch creaked softly, and she knew Adrian wasn't asleep either. A part of her wanted to leave things buried. But another, weaker part of her, the part that still felt the sting of his absence, wanted answers. She swallowed and spoke into the dark. "Why now?" Adrian shifted, and for a moment, she thought he might pretend not to hear her. But then his voice came, quiet and raw. "Because I never wanted to leave you." Lena sat up, gripping the blanket. "That's not an answer." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, letting out a tired laugh. "You think it was easy for me to disappear? That I just wanted to break your heart?" He shook his head. "I had no choice." Her chest tightened. "There's always a choice." He sighed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. The dim glow of the city lights cast sharp angles across his face, making him look older, weary. "I was protecting you." Lena's pulse stumbled. "From what?" He hesitated. A muscle in her jaw twitched. "Don't do that. Don't start a sentence you don't plan on finishing." Adrian exhaled slowly, as if weighing his next words. "There were things I couldn't tell you. Things that could have put you in danger if you got too close." His eyes met hers, filled with something she couldn't quite place. Regret, guilt, longing. "I thought leaving was the only way to keep you safe." Lena's fingers curled into the sheets. "Safe from what, Adrian?" He didn't answer right away. She let out a humorless laugh. "So, what? You woke up one day and decided I wasn't worth the risk? That I was better off without you?" "You were." His voice was hoarse, strained. "I needed you to be happy, Lena. Even if it meant losing you." Her heart clenched. "And you thought disappearing without a word would make me happy?" Adrian rubbed a hand over his face. "I didn't think it through, okay? He stopped, inhaling sharply. "I thought if I cut ties completely, you'd move on faster. That you wouldn't wait for answers I couldn't give." Lena shook her head, an ache settling deep in her chest. "That's not how love works, Adrian." His jaw tightened. "I know." Silence stretched between them. She studied him, the man she had loved, the man who had left her shattered. He looked the same but different, like someone who had carried too many burdens for too long. And yet, despite everything, despite the anger and the pain, she still felt the pull. The magnetic force that had always existed between them, the part of her that wanted to reach for him even when she knew she shouldn't. She closed her eyes briefly, then let out a slow breath. "I don't know what you expect from me," she admitted. "You can't just walk back into my life and think everything will go back to the way it was." "I don't expect that." His voice was quiet, but certain. "I just want you to know the truth." Lena's throat tightened. "And what am I supposed to do with that?" Adrian didn't answer. She didn't expect him to, because there was no easy fix for this. No way to erase the pain of the past year. Lena lay back down, staring at the ceiling. "Go to sleep, Adrian." This time he didn't argue. And despite the storm outside, despite the war inside her chest, Lena finally drifted off, unsure if she would wake up hating him, missing him, or something far more dangerous. Because no matter how much she fought it, the truth remained. She had never stopped loving him either. Lena woke to the sound of rain still tapping against the windows, the storm having mellowed into a steady drizzle. For a moment, she forgot where she was, warmth and comfort wrapping around her like a cocoon. Then reality came crashing back. She wasn't alone. Adrian was here. Her eyes fluttered open, drawn instinctively to the couch. It was empty. Panic shot through her chest before she spotted him standing near the window, his back to her. The faint glow of the overcast sky silhouetted his tall frame, his shoulders tense as he stared outside. Lena sat up slowly, the sheets pooling around her waist. Couldn't sleep? Adrian glanced over his shoulder. There was something unreadable in his expression, something that made her heart clench. Not much, he admitted. She hesitated before pushing the blanket off and standing. Did the storm clear?
He nodded.
The worst of it, yeah. She joined him by the window, the misty horizon stretching before them. The ocean was calmer now, waves rolling lazily against the shore, as if the night's fury had never happened. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian broke the silence. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I never left? Lena stiffened. Of all the things she wanted to talk about, this wasn't one of them. She crossed her arms. What's the point of thinking about things that never happened? He exhaled, shaking his head. I do it all the time. Lena swallowed.
So do I.
But she wouldn't say it. She couldn't say it. She turned away from the window. Look, Adrian, I don't know why we're having this conversation. You made your choice. His jaw tensed. And I regret it every damn day. Her breath hitched. Then why did you do it? He hesitated, and for a second, she thought he'd retreat again, lock himself behind the same walls he always had. But then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. There was someone after me. Lena's pulse quickened. What? Adrian ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his posture. I didn't want to tell you. Hell, I shouldn't be telling you now. But you deserve to know. He turned to face her fully. I got caught up in something dangerous, Lena. And if I had stayed, you would have been caught up in it too. She stared at him, processing his words. What kind of danger? Adrian hesitated, as if weighing how much to say. Let's just say there were people who didn't take kindly to me being in their way. I couldn't risk them using you to get to me. Lena's mind reeled. So, you disappeared? Just like that. His gaze was heavy with guilt. I thought it was the only way. She shook her head, her chest tightening. You should have told me. I couldn't. She let out a bitter laugh.
Right.
Because you thought I was too weak to handle the truth. Adrian's eyes darkened.
No.
Because if I had told you, you would have never let me go. And I couldn't live with the thought of you getting hurt because of me. The air between them was thick, charged with anger, hurt, and something else, something far more dangerous. Lena clenched her fists. You don't get to decide what I can or can't handle, Adrian. You took that choice away from me. You left me with nothing but questions and pain. His expression twisted. And you think that was easy for me? Walking away from you was the hardest thing I've ever done. Then why didn't you fight for us? Her voice cracked. Why didn't you try to find another way? Adrian stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. Because I was scared. His confession was raw, unfiltered. I was scared of losing you forever. Scared of dragging you into a world you didn't belong in. He exhaled shakily. But the truth is, I lost you anyway. Lena's throat burned. She wanted to hate him. She should hate him. But the way he was looking at her, the weight of his regret pressing between them, it made it impossible to ignore the truth. She never stopped loving him. And despite everything, neither had he. A tense silence stretched between them. Then Adrian spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. If I asked for another chance, would you give it to me? Lena's heart pounded. She should say no. She should walk away before she got hurt again. But deep down, she knew the answer wasn't that simple. Lena's breath hitched. The weight of Adrian's question settled between them, heavy and suffocating. If he had asked her this a year ago, she wouldn't have hesitated. She would have run back into his arms without a second thought.
But now?
She wasn't sure if love was enough anymore. Adrian held her gaze, waiting, his expression unreadable. For once, he wasn't hiding behind carefully constructed walls. He was laying everything bare, exposing a vulnerability she had never seen before. And it terrified her. Lena swallowed hard, her voice unsteady. You can't just walk back into my life and expect things to be the same. I know. She crossed her arms, needing to create some distance between them. You made me believe I wasn't worth fighting for, that I wasn't enough to make you stay. His face twisted in pain. That's not true. It felt true, she snapped. For months, I replayed every moment, wondering what I did wrong, wondering why I wasn't enough. Adrian took a step closer, his voice rough. Lena, you were everything to me. That's why I had to leave. She laughed bitterly. Do you even hear yourself? You're asking me to believe that you left because you loved me? Yes. The conviction in his voice made her chest tighten. I know it sounds insane, but it's the truth. If I had stayed, you could have been hurt. You could have. He exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. I couldn't live with that risk. Lena shook her head. But you could live with breaking me? Silence. She took another breath, steadying herself. What kind of danger were you in, Adrian? What were you protecting me from? His jaw tensed. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then finally he spoke. There were people after me, he admitted. People I got involved with, before I met you. And when they found out about us, they wanted to use you as leverage. Her stomach twisted. Leverage for what? Adrian hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. Let's just say, I had something they wanted, and they would have done anything to get it. Lena's heart pounded. So instead of trusting me, instead of telling me the truth, you just disappeared? His expression darkened. If they knew how much you meant to me, they wouldn't have stopped until they had you. Her breath faltered. She had spent so long believing he left because he stopped loving her, because he had simply moved on. But now, the truth was so much worse. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling suddenly exposed. You should have told me, Adrian. I know, he admitted, regret thick in his tone. And if I could go back, I'd do everything differently. Lena let out a shaky breath, trying to make sense of it all. It didn't erase the pain. It didn't undo the nights she spent crying herself to sleep. But it changed something. It made her realize that she had never been the problem. That maybe she had always been enough. She turned back toward the window, needing a moment to think. The storm had passed, but the clouds remained, hanging low over the horizon, much like the storm inside her. Adrian stepped beside her, his presence warm but cautious. I don't expect you to forgive me, Lena. I don't expect you to trust me again overnight. She exhaled, her fingers curling against the cool glass. Then what do you expect? He hesitated. A chance to prove that I never stopped loving you. Her heart clenched. She should walk away. She should tell him that love wasn't enough, that too much had happened. But the truth was, a part of her still wanted to believe him. A part of her still wanted him. Lena closed her eyes. I don't know if I can give you that. Adrian didn't push. He simply nodded. Then I'll wait. However long it takes. And for the first time since seeing him again, Lena wasn't sure if she wanted him to stop waiting. Lena spent the rest of the morning in a haze, her emotions tangled in a mess she couldn't unravel. Even after Adrian's confession, the pain of his absence hadn't vanished. It still sat heavily in her chest, a wound that refused to close. He had left to protect her. He had never stopped loving her. It should have made things easier. But instead, it only made them more complicated. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at her own reflection. Her dark hair was still slightly tousled from sleep, her eyes filled with emotions she didn't want to name. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Lena? Adrian's voice was hesitant, careful. The front desk just called. The storm cleared enough for the roads to open again. Relief and something dangerously close to disappointment twisted inside her. It meant she could finally leave. Finally escape this room, this tension, this history between them. But why did it feel like she was walking away from something unfinished? She took a deep breath before stepping out of the bathroom. Adrian stood near the door, hands in his pockets, watching her carefully. "I called for a car," he said. "It should be here in an hour." Lena nodded.
Good.
Silence stretched between them, thick and charged. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, hesitating. "Lena, I meant what I said last night." She swallowed, looking anywhere but at him. "I know." His gaze burned into her, but she refused to meet it. "Does that change anything?" he asked, his voice softer now.
Did it?
Lena wasn't sure. She had spent so long hating him, so long believing he had stopped loving her. But now that she knew the truth, the lines she had drawn so clearly in her mind were beginning to blur. The rational part of her told her to walk away. The part of her heart that still ached for him wasn't so sure. She lifted her chin, forcing herself to hold steady. "I don't know, Adrian. I need time." He nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. "I'll give you all the time you need." She turned toward the window, watching the waves crash against the shore. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "Do you regret it?" Adrian frowned. "Regret what?" "Leaving." His throat worked as he swallowed. Every single day. Her chest ached. She could feel him behind her, close but not touching. It would be so easy to turn around, to let him back in. But some wounds needed more than time to heal. The phone on the nightstand buzzed, breaking the moment. Adrian reached for it, glancing at the screen. "The car's here," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Lena nodded, grabbing her bag. She walked toward the door, but before she could reach for the handle, Adrian spoke again. "I'll wait, Lena, for as long as it takes." She paused, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. Then, without looking back, she opened the door and stepped out. She wasn't sure if she was walking away from him, or if she was finally walking back toward him. The ride back to the city was quiet. Lena stared out the window, watching raindrops streak against the glass as the luxury resort disappeared behind them. The storm had passed, but inside her, the chaos remained. Adrian sat beside her, his presence impossible to ignore. He wasn't touching her, wasn't even looking at her, but she could feel him, like a pull she couldn't shake. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. She could still hear his voice from earlier, raw and unguarded. "I'll wait, Lena, for as long as it takes." Her chest ached. Did she even want him to wait? She had spent so much time convincing herself she had moved on, that she had buried the love she once felt for him. But after one night, one conversation, she wasn't so sure anymore. She wasn't sure if she had ever stopped loving him at all. As the city skyline came into view, Lena felt panic creep in. This was the part where they went their separate ways, where she walked away and pretended that everything between them was over. But could she? Could she really leave this unfinished? The car pulled up in front of her apartment building, and the driver turned to her with a polite nod. "Miss, we've arrived." Lena hesitated. She felt Adrian shift beside her, felt the way his body tensed like he was bracing himself for her to leave. She turned to him, her heart pounding. "Come upstairs with me." Adrian's head snapped up. His blue eyes darkened with surprise. "Lena." "Just to talk," she said quickly, though even she wasn't sure if that was the truth. "Please." For a moment he said nothing, just watching her. Then he exhaled, nodding. "Okay." Lena stepped out of the car, her hands trembling as she led him inside. Her apartment. The moment the door closed behind them, the tension in the air shifted. Adrian stood in the center of her living room, looking completely out of place yet so familiar at the same time. Lena set her bag down, turning to face him. "Why did you say you'd wait?" He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Because I lost you once, Lena."
I won't lose you again.
Her breath caught. She wanted to believe him, but believing meant letting herself fall again. And falling meant risking everything. Lena took a hesitant step closer. "And if I can't give you an answer right now?" Adrian didn't hesitate. Then I'll wait anyway. She let out a shaky breath. You're so damn stubborn. A small, crooked smile touched his lips. Always have been. Silence stretched between them. Then, before she could stop herself, she reached for him. Adrian froze as her fingers brushed his wrist. Lena's heart pounded. I don't know if I can trust you again, she whispered. But I do know that I've never stopped wanting you. Something shifted in his expression, something raw and consuming. Then don't fight it, he murmured, stepping closer. And just like that, she was in his arms again. His lips crashed against hers, and the world around them disappeared. It wasn't soft. It wasn't careful. It was desperate. Consuming. A kiss years in the making. Lena pressed closer, her hands fisting his shirt, as if letting go would break the moment. Adrian groaned against her lips, his hands tangling in her hair, holding her like he was afraid she'd slip away. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. Adrian rested his forehead against hers. Tell me this isn't just the past pulling us back together. Lena swallowed, her heart racing. I don't know what this is. He exhaled shakily. Then let's figure it out. Together. She closed her eyes. Maybe she was making a mistake. Maybe this would end in heartbreak all over again. But as Adrian pulled her closer, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't ready to let him go. Not yet. Lena didn't know who moved first, but suddenly, Adrian's lips were on hers again, and this time, there was no hesitation. His hands slid into her hair, fingers tangling as he deepened the kiss. A soft sigh escaped her, and Adrian groaned in response, pulling her flesh against him. The heat between them was electric, years of longing colliding in a single, breathless moment. She clung to him, tilting her head as his mouth moved against hers, slow and intoxicating. He tasted like rain and something familiar, something that made her chest ache. This wasn't just a kiss. It was every unsaid word, every regret, every emotion they had buried for so long. Adrian's hands traced down her back, his touch sending shivers down her spine. When his lips left hers, trailing down the curve of her jaw, Lena gasped. Adrian, her voice was barely a whisper. He paused, his breath warm against her skin. Tell me to stop, Lena, he murmured. If this isn't what you want, tell me now. She knew this was dangerous. She knew letting him back in could break her all over again. But right now, with his hands on her and his heartbeat matching hers, she didn't care. She met his gaze, her fingers curling into his shirt. I don't want you to stop. A low curse left his lips before he kissed her again, harder this time. Lena felt herself being lifted, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her effortlessly. She barely registered the motion until her back hit the soft cushions of the couch, Adrian hovering over her, his eyes dark with need. He traced his fingers along her cheek, softer now, reverent. You have no idea how much I've missed you, he admitted. Her heart clenched, because she had missed him too. Instead of answering, she pulled him down, silencing him with another kiss. And this time, she let herself forget everything else. The night melted into something slow and intoxicating. Adrian's touch was both familiar and new, reigniting something in Lena she thought had long been buried. She let herself get lost in him, just for tonight. But morning always came, and with it, reality. Lena woke to the soft glow of sunlight filtering through her curtains. For a moment, she forgot everything, the storm, the past, the heartbreak. Then she felt the warmth beside her. Adrian. Her breath hitched as she turned her head. He was still asleep, his face relaxed, dark lashes casting shadows over his cheekbones. She studied him, memories of last night crashing over her. It had been perfect. Too perfect. And that terrified her. Because perfect never lasted. Carefully, she slipped out of bed, grabbing his shirt and pulling it over herself. The apartment was quiet as she padded to the kitchen, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. This wasn't just a kiss. It wasn't just one night. It was everything they had fought against, everything she had tried to move on from. She leaned against the counter, inhaling deeply. Was she ready to open herself up to this again? To him? Soft footsteps behind her made her tense. She didn't need to turn to know Adrian was there. Running away? His voice was rough with sleep, but there was something else there, too.
Fear.
Lena closed her eyes. I don't know. A heavy silence stretched between them. Then, she felt his arms wrap around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. His warmth surrounded her, grounding her. I know I hurt you, Adrian murmured. And I know I don't deserve a second chance. But I love you, Lena. I never stopped. Her chest ached. Love isn't the problem, Adrian. Then what is? His hold tightened slightly. Tell me and I'll fix it. I'll do whatever it takes. She turned in his arms, searching his face. I'm scared.
His gaze softened.
So am I. Her fingers curled into his shirt. What if we do this again, and it still falls apart? Adrian cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing gently against her skin. Then we fight for it.
We don't run this time.
No more secrets. No more leaving. Lena swallowed hard, emotions swelling inside her. Could she do this? Could she trust him again? As she looked into his eyes, she realized something. She wanted to try. She wanted him. Taking a deep breath, she whispered, "Then let's try." Relief flooded Adrian's face before he pulled her into a deep, lingering kiss. This time, it wasn't desperate. It wasn't rushed. It was a promise. A beginning. As the city awakened around them, Lena knew one thing for sure. She wasn't running anymore. And neither was he.